So, what are identities? They're the parts of us that are us, right? They're ways we define who we are and where we fit in the world. And we're never just one identity. As Dr. Tatum points out, identity is complex and is influenced by everything around us: our families, our neighbors, our schools and teachers, and all the other institutions we interact with. These are the two main types of identities. Some are personal. These are the identities that help make you unique and are part of your individual personality and choices. Then there are group or social identities. These are identities that express what social groups you are part of. It's important to recognize that some of these are assigned by society, like race, socioeconomic status, or gender, and some of these are self-chosen, like being part of a community organization, a fan of a particular sports team, or a member of a geekier fandom like Whovians or Trekkers. We're going to focus on the assigned categories in this class, the identities you don't choose, but are chosen for you. This is what's known as a personal identity map. You can see some examples of personal identity categories here. Things like birth order, number of siblings, skills and hobbies, and favorites like music and food. I'd like you to pause the video here and take a moment to consider how you'd fill this out. You can write the answers down, or you can just think of your answer. This next map looks very similar, right? This time we're mapping social identities. These are all the ways we categorize people. I'd like to point out a couple things here that some people might find confusing. First, both sex and gender are listed here. These are things we often use interchangeably, but they're not the same. Sex generally refers to biological characteristics, things like genitals, DNA, and secondary sex characteristics. Gender refers to how we present ourselves, our actions, movements, style choices, and conception of self. Next, you'll see ethnicity, national origin, and first language as separate items. These are often related, but are distinct. Ethnicity refers to culture, shared traditions, and patterns of behavior. These are sometimes geographically linked, but may be linked to something else like religion. Similarly, while many people of an ethnicity or geographic location might share a common language, this isn't always the case. I'd like you to pause the video again and think about how you'd fill out this map. I'd like for you to think especially deeply about the questions in the middle of the map. These are important in understanding not just what social groups you are a member of, but how those groups relate to your overall sense of self. In the United States, and the scope of this course is only the United States, we have a system of social hierarchy. This means we have some identities that are normalized and therefore dominant, and some identities that are marginalized and compared against those dominant identities. In general, those with dominant identities tend to hold more social, financial, and political power than those with marginalized identities. Furthermore, because dominant identities are normalized and considered the default, people with dominant identities are unlikely to put much emphasis on that identity, and often do not see it as an advantage. Marginalized identities, however, are usually very prominent in a person's experience, because having a marginalized identity usually makes one very aware of the lack of social, financial, and political power they possess because of that identity. This is the last map we're going to look at for now. This maps your identity against the dominator model, which is another way of describing social hierarchies. Again, I'd like you to pause and map out your own identity here. A few notes. First, cisgender is a term to mean people whose sex and gender match, as opposed to transgender people whose sex and gender do not necessarily match. We'll delve much further into that later in the semester. Second, you'll see a reference to magazine look. This is someone who is considered conventionally attractive. Maybe not a model, but someone who looks similar to the majority of people in magazines and TV. The highlighted parts on this map are my own identities. You can see I have a lot of dominant identities. This means those are identities I usually don't spend much time thinking about, and which usually don't create barriers to me accessing resources I need or want. This also means I need to be cognizant of the fact that I may not always be able to discern an oppression that is happening in a category where my own identity is dominant, and be mindful not to be dismissive of a person with a marginalized identity's experience. Next, I'm going to send you to a great video about socialization. Socialization is the process by which we learn about identities. Enjoy it, and I'll be back with another video afterwards.